Um, got it. I'm incredibly inspired by the work that Sunrise does across the country, and it seems like you really have a robust hub in Pittsburgh. It's really, really cool to just see how you've provided this outlet for youth and young people everywhere to become leaders to address really one of the greatest crises that we face in our time. My name is Trevor Cohen, and I'm a writer, and I focus on hope at the edge of the climate crisis. Over the last 5 years, I interviewed hundreds of different innovators and activists who are building the foundation of a sustainable society. And I combined many of their different insights and stories into this book, Bright Green Future. And really the book is all about how can we begin to envision the future that we want to create. And a lot of that comes from the work that you all do at Sunrise. And I wanted to take this opportunity, which thank you so much for providing, to share some of the stories within the book, and also to have a conversation with you all about the way we conceptualize our crises and the way we envision a bright future. And so, you know, doing all this work, sometimes I have to admit that I do feel a little bit like a hopeless romantic sometimes. You know, the seas are rising, the land is drying out, we've got a firestorm in one season, and then a polar vortex in the next. And that's not even talking about all the political, cultural, economic challenges to even do anything about it. But, you know, instead of tuning that all out, instead of watching Netflix on the couch at the end of our busy days, we're here in meetings like this. And we're staring straight into the heart of this seemingly hopeless situation. It's because we're determined to fix this mess. We believe that not only can we stop the destruction of our planet, but at the same time, create a better world than the one we live in now. To people outside this movement, this different various climate movements, this might seem like mere idealism, but I believe that we have a secret that makes our dreams much more realistic than they may appear. Our secret is that we think differently. We know that we can't solve the climate crisis with the same thinking that caused it. And so we view the future through a different lens. The way we conceptualize a crisis often defines how we respond to it. And so I would like to ask you all here, you all as climate activists and people involved in this work of creating a better future, I would like to ask you all a question to learn from your experience as activists and to better understand the way that you see the world. And so my question to you all is, what types of thinking do you feel we need in order to break free from our fossil fueled economy and envision a truly sustainable society? So I'm just going to open this up, and feel free to let this question soak in, and would love to hear what you think about types of thinking we need to envision this sustainable society and move beyond fossil fuels and the old economy. Let's see, I see some things in the chat. Elise saying, thinking that prioritizes justice and care, an economy that isn't oriented around endless growth, from Sunrise Pittsburgh. I think that's Danny. Nebraska, thinking that centers care and interconnectedness. Yeah, those are all great. Yeah, thinking about community / collective, from Amanda. Tom says sorry, Amanda says, thinking about community/collective as opposed to individualism. Tom says, opportunism. Every time a decision maker has an opportunity to build a more sustainable or just world, they should take it. Most of these opportunities are available to people and institutions with power. So most of the solutions are systemic. Yeah, that's a great point. Like, yeah, taking the opportunities we have in order to make it happen. People over profit from Benjamin. Luna Angelina, thinking for ourselves, thinking critically, and questioning the pushed narratives of our nation state. Interesting. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. What do you mean by the pushed narratives of our nation state? Is that the kind of the deferred things that we've kind of put off dealing with in terms of culture, race, economics?
Yeah, I mean, that could be incredibly broad. Just all the propaganda that our states puts out. Just, yeah, it's very broad. And even just fighting for a sustainable society, there's obviously a lot of things that we need to push against, propaganda that the state puts out, that goes against what we're fighting for.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Like, it's so strong in a way that we don't even realize sometimes the messages that we're getting against a lot of the stuff that you all have mentioned around thinking of only the individual and not thinking of kind of the long-term collective vision. This because it's baked into all the incentives in our society and the messages around that. It's a huge topic, and I would love to discuss that at length. That's really cool. Thanks for bringing that up. Mick question or Kelly S. Putting happiness above GDP. Yes, hell yes. Very good. Did anybody want to elaborate on anything that they wrote in either like talking into the chat or anything like that? Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you all for that. That was great. It's really cool to see all the different kind of ways we're thinking about how to move beyond our fossil fueled economy and all of the many like expansion of thinking that's required in order to make that shift, in addition to the physical stuff that we have to change, the economics, the actual shifting of money, but that a lot of that starts with the thinking change. And so obviously, yeah, you all shared a lot of really great and really important types of thinking. I wanted to take the rest of this conversation hour to share and add to your repertoire of sustainable design thinking from many different conversations that I had with sustainability change makers over the last 5 years, that I started to see different things come up in common that when they were talking about their visions to create a sustainable society. And so I wanted to share these kind of three thematic types of thinking that I feel are helpful in terms of envisioning that sustainable society. And so those different ways of thinking are, first off, systems thinking, which is really about finding the deeper patterns that are hiding in plain sight and digging beyond them, beyond the surface, to think about not how do we just fix one thing, but how, in understanding and seeing how the system works, how do we create something that creates a healthy system. Secondly is community thinking, which is all about embracing local people as beneficiaries of change. And Obviously we need change, and this is something Sunrise really distinguishes yourself as, is we need change, but it should really benefit people on the ground. It should benefit all of our various unique communities with our unique needs and challenges that we face, as well as provide opportunities for the strengths that we have in our communities. And then thirdly is regeneration, which is all about creating both systems and communities that grow stronger and healthier over time, that rather than degrade with every passing year, become more resilient to respond to different crises, as well as better able to benefit from opportunities that come up at the same time. And so I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into these different types of thinkings with specific examples of how initiatives have across the United States from many different places have incorporated these different ways of thinking into what they've done, and how it's led to really cool projects. So first off, systems thinking in a nutshell is really, rather than seeing things as disconnected and separate from each other, operating in different silos, it's seeing things as overlapping and interweaving and intersectional. It's about seeing things not as linear, as starting from point A to point B, but seeing point A as the feed into, or point B at the end as the feed into point A, and things as working in cycles, similar to how natural systems work. It's not thinking in silos, but seeing things emerging at once. It's looking at the larger whole rather than solely the parts. I'm going to share a story with you all, which I think really highlights the difference between this traditional reductionist thinking compared with a holistic thinking approach. I like to call this story the parable of the techie and the farmer, because it has to do with a conversation I had with an entrepreneur in San Francisco. This is one day I was sitting with a friend, and I had met this new person, and he was talking. He was kind of like I guess what is in the Bay Area is called a serial entrepreneur, who had started many different businesses. And when I asked him what he did, he said, "Oh, I'm working on 7 different companies at once, and so I can't really say exactly what I'm doing." And definitely part of this culture of like, we can kind of hack all the problems and solve them all using like a very kind of like an engineer approach to everything. And in this conversation, he made the point that regenerative organic farming, or really kind of any farming that is focused on healing the soil, is, for lack of a better word, bullshit. He said, if we really wanted to sequester carbon in the earth and use and maximize our ability to do that on the land, we would just put a giant carbon capture machine on that land. And per acre, we could sequester much more carbon than we could with any or regenerative organic farm on that land. And we would be much more effective at drawing down carbon. And of course, he might have been right about that one thing. And it really highlighted the difference between reductionist versus holistics and systems thinking, where often the predominant way of thinking is around how do we maximize one metric, one thing? How do we get the most of one thing? And if that thing is carbon, then yeah, the logical thing to say is put a carbon capture machine on that in that land. But by doing that, you start to see how when we were solely focused on this traditional thinking, you start to see how that solution kind of seems a little bit silly in a certain sense, where obviously the only benefit of a carbon capture machine on the land is capturing carbon, where by contrast, a regenerative organic farm not only sequesters carbon in the soil, but also provides healthy food, has really good benefits for water capture that can hold water better during times of droughts, as well as absorb water during times of flood as almost a flood management system. If we had a lot more regeneratively managed land, as well as providing a place for people to learn about the connection between where our food comes from and to learn new skills, and like many different farms becoming like a hub for building confidence, building skills, and connecting with nature and the larger food system that supports us. And taking a step back, thinking about larger systems, we start to see that the pattern of both the city and the farm often resembles a monoculture. We're focused in this traditional approach on maximizing one thing in our cities. We maximize housing in one area, we maximize commerce in another with malls or strip malls or big shopping centers, and then we maximize making things and industry in another area. We do the same thing with farms. We maximize soybeans in one area, corn in another, wheat in another. And within our cities, we're not thinking about what is the benefit of the whole as kind of the neighborhood that comes together when, if any of you lived in a city that was built before a lot of this reductionist approach to city building came about, you notice the benefits that come from being able to walk to stores in the area, to restaurants, the third spaces that come about to meet people, and all of kind of the cool interactions and benefits that come from that. As well as the same thing with a farm, just maximizing one thing and turning it into a farms into solely an industrial operation. We start to lose all the different benefits that could come to the soil and to communities around those farms. And so what does it look like when we apply when we take this both city and farm and apply a systems thinking approach to it? This is just one example from a town in Arizona called Gilbert, Arizona. And it actually, this example started when a town was growing very rapidly. And there was a farm there were a bunch of farms on the edge of town. And when developers came to turn this one family farm into a new, basically residential subdivision with many different housing, like a residential neighborhood, the farm owners actually said, we want to do something different. We don't want to lose that sense of community that we once had in small towns, and kind of just do the normal development. And so what they ended up doing was creating a residential community that's integrated and surrounded and integrated and built around a organic farm, where residents get to learn about farming, as well as access the fresh produce there, use the farm as an event space. And at the same time, they also mixed different uses within the neighborhood that they built. They turned the old, as you can see, this shed right here, it used to be a tractor shed, and actually one point was like a hangar for aircraft. And they converted it into a space for small businesses and makers to start to kind of have this kind of integrated space where they could make stuff as well as sell their stuff at the same place, and that's called Bar None. There's like a brewer there, there's some craft makers, and then they also, in the old farmhouse, built a restaurant in there, and then they also built a coffee shop on site too. And the restaurant and coffee shop draw from the produce of the farm as well. And even within the residential community, oftentimes developers will think about, okay, we just want to maximize one type of housing for one type of person. Like this is a place for middle-class single-family homes, or this is multifamily apartment complexes, or this is like a retirement community, or this is a place for students. And instead of doing that, they decided to mix many different uses in that, many different residential types in that community. So they had single family homes, they had apartment buildings, they had a senior living facility as well there, as well as a school that was actually built in the neighborhood, to kind of mix these different different periods of our lives and different types of people in a kind of a more diverse way into a neighborhood, and not kind of thinking of it that this is just for families, this is just for seniors, this is just for young students. And so in doing that, they turn this area, which would have just been kind of a normal residential neighborhood, into a destination in the area where people still come to go out to eat, to visit one of these local craft makers, as well as the farm is actually a wedding venue and event space too, so people actually get married there. So they out of, like, instead of just creating maximizing the value of like one residential metric, they created all these really cool things that came out of it, and opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The second type of thinking is community thinking, and that's all about really looking at the community and the people who live in a place as the beneficiaries of kind of any change we make. And I know I mentioned this, like Sunrise has really pushed on that in a way that has incorporated, I think, that thinking into a lot of how our leaders in government are at least talking about wanting to do things that are taking community into account. Whether or not they do it, that's another thing. But essentially, it's all about shifting the benefits of change to community. So if we look at the existing centralized fossil fuel industry, the majority of the beneficiaries are, from the revenue and profits generated, are fossil fuel companies and utilities. Most of the money is flowing to them. We obviously benefit from being able to drive and heat our homes and electricity. But when we're really thinking about what are these, what are the things that enable that doing, they are polluting different neighborhoods and frontline communities. They're having different larger negative impacts on the climate and ecologies, and the beneficiaries of kind of the money that comes out of that is a handful of companies and utility operators. With contrast, we have this opportunity as we develop more distributed renewables that are less centralized, where they don't require quite as much upstart cost to get off the ground and projects can be smaller. We're starting to see all these really cool models, including community solar, including co-op renewables, including community choice in California, that are really pushing the boundaries of how we define beneficiaries of change. One example that I'll just mention is community choice in California, which essentially allows cities to band together and choose where their energy comes from. Essentially, they can choose where, basically form a nonprofit agency as a series of cities or counties, and choose, like, we want to transition to solar, and we want our energy to be procured this way, and we're going to start these projects in order to make that happen. And we also get to have any extra revenue, which would normally just go to utilities. We get to have that revenue go back to community projects, or go back to ratepayers, or be put into a number of other different kind of community-driven things that anyone at one of these organizations. I've actually done this myself when I lived in Oakland. I walked into the executive board meeting of one of these local organizations where there's people who are advocating for like what kind of projects they would want and how they would want the extra money from that we pay as electricity customers, where they want that to go. And this is something that community choice started in just one county, and then really expanded to now over 50% of the state, and over 20 community choice organizations. It provides electricity for like 50% of the state right now, and is continuing to grow really rapidly. And actually, they end up reducing the cost for customers, because these smaller organizations have a lot less kind of corporate bureaucracy, where the money is being distributed in a better way. And so they actually offer sometimes 15 to 30% less price for electricity. Community thinking is often about really adapting solutions to local needs and visions. This is an example in West Virginia of an organization known as Coalfield Development. And what they do is they hire laid off coal miners to transform old surface mines into food forests, to create new jobs, to grow healthy food in a place in West Virginia where the economy had been very much dominated by one industry, that being coal. And now as coal starts to collapse, Coalfield Development, this organization, has started a number of different social enterprises that are really focused on how do we diversify the economy, and as we need to transition away from coal as it's already declining, and how do we provide opportunities for people who'd been laid off in that transition. And so they look at like, what are the local needs, being we need to create a more diverse economy that had been dominated by one industry, as well as we have all of these abandoned surface mines, basically, I mean, tragic. It's mountains that had been blown apart. And like, what do we do with that land? And they actually have this really cool kind of stone crusher machine that's able to break up the rocks and turn it into soil. And they've planted regenerative organic farms on top of that soil. And in addition, they started a number of different social enterprises, including a construction company that builds affordable housing. Some of the materials they take actually from the old mines of leftover stuff and repurpose it into that, hiring local people who'd been laid off to kind of learn new construction skills. They'd also started a solar company, which is one of the first solar companies in West Virginia. They actually acquired a t-shirt company that makes t-shirts out of recycled material for Major League Baseball. And everyone who's hired by Coalfield Development to work at a number of their different social enterprises is also enrolled into a program that provides a free associate's degree for a 2-year degree. It also provides 6 hours of personal development, as well as counseling for folks who are enrolled in it. I think it's called the 30. I'm blanking on the name. The 36 and 3 program, of like 30 hours of work during the week, 6 hours of personal development, 6 hours of college, and 3 hours of personal development. And it's all really rooted in Appalachian values. Some of the things that they're focused on is kind of their mantra is gumption, grit, and grace, which are really these values that have allowed people to survive and make a living in Appalachia for a long time. And really they see these skills, these Appalachian skills of being able to fix things really well, and taking pride in craft work, as being, and also it's like strong connection to community as being really key to and at the forefront of a new regenerative and renewable economy. This is another example of a project in South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And this is an organization known as Thunder Valley Community Development Organization, Community Development Corporation. And what they do is they've multi-solve around multiple community needs. And so they've applied both a systemic approach as well as a community approach. And what they did was they looked at like what basically spent like years interviewing people on the reservation, started by a few folks from the reservation, and they interviewed people about like what challenges they faced, what was their vision, and what did they want to see for their future. And rather than kind of as one person put it, who I interviewed, rather than just like hand out propane and Pampers, which is kind of just like giving stuff that's needed, they really wanted systemic change. They wanted to create something that they were really proud of, and that was rooted in the Lakota culture, as well as something that like youth could be really proud of. And so they looked at kind of what some of their biggest needs were, a few of them being just severe unemployment of around 70% for some people, or in some communities in the area, as well as a lack of housing too, where oftentimes in some communities the average household was 15 people living in like a 2-bedroom trailer, or kind of mobile home trailer. And so they kind of took these two issues, these two challenges, and combined them into one kind of single solution. And so they built this regenerative community, which it's kind of like a neighborhood where it combines housing, it combines a regenerative organic farm, and they built it by hiring youth in the area to build the houses and not just use outside construction workers, but to train youth in construction, and to also, as these houses become built, provide an opportunity for actually even some of the people who built the houses to live in them and become first-time homeowners. And I heard one story of a 24-year-old who had just learned construction and was who grew up on the reservation, was building this house, was becoming a first-time homeowner in one of the houses that he helped build. And they talked a lot about even the design of the neighborhood, around traditionally like how Lakota used to camp and set up their tents around a circle, and had really replicated that in the design of the place. And then at the heart of it, built a regenerative organic farm that has like chickens that produce eggs for the community, and that are sold at the local supermarkets as well as gas stations, and then also given out to people who need the food. And there have been, I don't know currently now, but at least when I talk to folks, like something like 99% of the food was came in from outside of the community. It wasn't grown there, and so they started to try to produce more of their own food and kind of explore food sovereignty. And then also having a cultural, they built a community center there that provides different classes, including financial literacy, as well as Lakota language, and then a number of different like daycare and other classes for people in the community. And they hope to have, like, at one point, eventually as many as 900 people living at this community, providing housing and providing kind of a center to regenerate their local economy and traditions, and really hope for kind of the future, and kind of this also providing this indigenous model for urban development, which is also really interesting. When we talk about a lot of how do we redefine urbanism, we often look back to Europe as kind of the source of kind of restoring that old walkable core of European cities. But there's also this tradition of that goes back for millennium of how indigenous communities and nations have built towns and built community around that. So it also provides an inspiration in all these different areas for how we might think about different projects in our areas, kind of drawing around this wisdom throughout, this unique wisdom throughout our country. And then thirdly, we have regenerative thinking. And regeneration is all about thinking of cycles that, as I mentioned, grow healthier and stronger over time. And so regeneration can be thought of in many different ways. It can be often thought and used in this term around regenerative agriculture and regenerating the land. This is an example of an organization called the Regen Ag Alliance, based out of Minnesota, where Reginaldo Hazlet Marroquin started it. And it's basically, he developed this permaculture system that integrates chickens with fruit and nut trees, as well as other different crops, into a pretty small permaculture setup, anywhere from 3 to 1.5 acres to even smaller. And he developed this system that that he uses to train migrant farm workers, which, in the US, over 70% of farm labor is from migrant farm workers. And he's actually training migrant farm workers with this kind of permaculture system to start their own kind of like own farm enterprises, and using chickens as kind of a much lower barrier to entry, and setting it up in a way using high value nuts and fruit as a way, and combining it with chickens in a regenerative way, so that together they're kind of creating this really strong soil. And he even describes kind of all of the manure and the leaf litter and everything as kind of recharging the battery of the soil and the battery of the earth, so that it's stronger the next season. And so that rather than every year you're degrading the land more, and then having to put more money into it, more chemical inputs into it in order to get stuff out of it, it's actually growing stronger, where you using less inputs every year, you're getting higher yields, you're able to produce stuff for less money and sell stuff for less money, and then also get more income yourself. And so he's taking all this wisdom and knowledge, which he actually was originally inspired by rainforest ecosystems from where he grew up in Guatemala, and really thinking about an acre is not just something like 40,000 square feet. Instead of thinking of about it as like a square, thinking of it as 3 dimensions, and thinking about the canopy of how from 20 feet up to all the way down to the roots, how does this kind of integrated system produce so much, like almost effortlessly, in as it would appear in a rainforest ecosystem? How does it provide so much without and get stronger over time, given that we're not cutting it down? And so he really took that wisdom and applied it to this model of regenerating the land, and then training migrant farm workers in how to do that, and how to turn that into kind of their own income and own beginning of their own venture. Then secondly, it's also important to be thinking about regeneration in terms of materials. So rather than thinking about this kind of linear, like we take stuff out of the ground, we make it into something, and then we throw it away and put it in a big pile. Instead, thinking about how do we regenerate our materials? And how do we think about those in a similar loop in the same way we're thinking about nutrient cycles in ecosystems or in a regenerative farm system? And so this is an example of Ronin 8, which is a company out of British Columbia, which what they do is they take e-waste, which often ends up in developing countries because current recyclers don't have any easy solutions to deal with. It ends up in kind of somebody else's backyard and ends up creating really terrible situations that pollute neighborhoods where people are kind of trying to extract gold and precious metals from our old electronics. And in doing so, putting themselves at risk, as well as polluting different local communities and local ecosystems at the same time. And so what Ronin 8, their focus is really on, like, how do we make these really complex machines that we create, like we have an economy that's all about like coming up with a new gadget that makes the next gadget obsolete within the next year. Like if that's the system we create, we really need to be thinking about how are we actually cycling those materials in those gadgets if we're going to just be constantly replacing them. And so what they've done is develop this interesting system where they repurposed, it actually was a tool used in mining to get separate metals and materials out of mine tailings developed by a mining company. And what they did is they repurposed it in order to separate all the materials out of our e-waste. And it's really interesting. It actually works using sound energy. It's kind of like a giant tuning fork where basically they shred our old electronics into this fine powder, and then they put it in water so that it doesn't create the toxic dust. And then using different, what they call harmonic resonance, separate out all the different materials, all the metals from the fiberglass, and then all the metals within themselves. And they've kind of been able to separate out like an entire, periodic table of metals that are in our electronics: the copper, the tin, silver, lead, gold, palladium, as well as all these different rare earth metals and nickel. Like there's just so much different things that we put into our electronics. And they're starting to thinking about how do we have like a gold cycle? Like what does a gold cycle look like? What does the copper cycle, the tin cycle, the silver cycle look like? And how are we making sure that when we create something new, that we're not losing it. It's not ending up in the trash in somebody else's backyard. And then also part of that too is they developed a way, and this is one of the things that they're really focused on now, of recycling our old lithium ion batteries, which are, obviously, as many of you know, are a big part of the renewable economy, of being able to store energy and in electric cars, as well as backing up solar and wind. And so they've developed a way to deal with lithium ion batteries in this safe, non-toxic way, so that we aren't having to just completely mine more lithium, as well as those kind of old batteries end up polluting places. So beyond just like the debate around fossil fuels versus renewable energy, thinking like deeper in a regenerative sense of like, we need to create a fully regenerative economy. We need to be thinking about what happens to our solar panels and our lithium ion batteries at the end of the day. And then lastly, regenerating people and regenerating communities. And this is Soul Fire Farm in upstate New York in Albany. And what they do is they empower and train Indigenous and Black farmers in different permaculture techniques, as well as construction and a number of other different skills to really be the foundation of starting new farms and new different kind of like farm/teaching centers in their communities that go on to build confidence and teach people new skills throughout the country, and that are responsive to like the local needs and the local visions and strengths. And they've the Soul Fire Farm and Leah Pennyman, who started it with her partner, have really kind of become a model for how to start a community farm in a way that's like regenerating the land and regenerating people, and providing like a really cool opportunities for people to make their visions real throughout the country. And yeah, so that is the end of my presentation. I hope you learned something new or found something interesting in that. If you would like to get more inspiration, I can offer 15% off the book with using promo code Sunrise. If you just go to brightgreenfuture.com, you can get a signed copy of the book. Actually have just got a whole new stack of them right here. And it contains many of those stories I mentioned, as well as many others that's really around like how do we envision this sustainable society, and who's building it, who's working on it right now. And also, if you want to get in touch, I'm happy to chat about anything, or if you have any collaboration ideas, you can reach me at trevor@brightgreenfuture.com. So yeah, that's the end of the presentation, and just wanted to open it up before we wrap up for any questions, thoughts, reactions to any of the things I presented or we discussed.